Good evening. Welcome to the February 23rd, 2021 Windham Southeast Supervisory District School Board meeting. This meeting is an informational meeting. The first agenda item is the budget, and the second agenda item is an informational meeting on the warrant articles around school withdrawal. I'm going to ask our business manager, Dr. Rucker, to share the screen and lead us through the first part of the meeting, going over the major points, major changes in the budget this year, and then we'll open it up to questions. I want to just remind people that may not be familiar with Zoom that if you wish to speak or have a question, at the bottom of your screen, there should be a little icon, a little smiley face with a plus that says reactions. And if you click on that, you will see a raise your hand icon. If you wish to speak, please raise your hand. The chair will recognize you. For the most part, Zoom successfully lists the hands raising in order on my participations list, so I can keep track of it that way. And you will be called upon in due course. I encourage people to be patient and to not speak out without being recognized. We operate by Robert's rules, which is calls for regular order, which requires that people be recognized. So without further delay, Frank, would you like to begin the process?
Okay, good evening. I'll do the share screen, and I'm going to the annual report that's on the website, and we have a summary page in the annual report that gives us our highlights. It's on page 4 if you happen to be looking at the hard copy. So for changes to the FY21 budget, you know, as proposed in FY22, we usually start with expenditures, and we have a 1.8% proposed increase, 931,000 for 52,103,000. So that's a rate of change that's pretty close to the inflation rate. We've got a couple of updated statistics since we published this. They were actually favorable statistics, but when we published this, $707 was the estimated tax impact of this increase in spending. That estimated tax impact is actually lower than the current year. The income sensitivity figure is also estimated, and it's largely set by the way in which the legislature sets an index that calculates that number. So our equalized spending per pupil, that's an important figure, just because when we go to set a tax rate, it is based on that figure. 19,432 has been actually reduced because of some of the adjustments that the legislature has given us. Just recently, our equalized student figure has gone up a little bit to 2,263 kids. And that reduces this figure here, the 19,432 down to 19,393. So those are favorable trends. And again, this proposal is projecting a tax rate that is lower than the current tax rate. And that is, I am talking about the equalized homestead school property tax rate. So what's behind the 931,000 in additional spending? Here's sort of the highlights of that. The largest number there, as you might expect, given that we are primarily a people-oriented business or entity, is salary and wages are up 695,000. That's a little less than 3%. Then we have an additional contributions to the capital fund for a number of projects coming up. Now that's an additional amount. The total amount is 738,000, but this is the additional amount over the prior year. Special education services are up. Fortunately, nothing like they were in the prior year in terms of a dramatic increase. This is a figure, 244,000, represents a little more than 4% increase over fiscal year 21. And then health insurance, normally this number is higher in our list of major increases. But part of the reason why it's not as high on the list, even though it is a 10% premium increase, the state legislature enacted Act 11, and Act 11 increased the amount that the teachers contribute to health insurance from, it was 15% and now it's 20%. So that lowers the employer share, but it's still an increase. So those are increases, and as you can see, these changes to the budget are greater than the 931,000 that we are proposing, and the reason for that is that we do have some reductions in the budget. The largest one is our regular ed outside placement, student placements to private providers. We're working hard to obviously always retain as many children as we can and educate them within our schools. Favorable, nice to see the workers' comp premium down substantially. That's both as a result of a bid process, but also favorable experience, or lower claims. And then another decrease associated with the bond debt, and 2 more years we'll see a massive drop there, assuming we don't have to replace the borrowing to that extent, and there's no indication that we would. But this is the normal reduction in the amortization schedule for interest. But I'm referring to a $1.6 million principal payment for the bond that was issued in 2003 for the major BUHS campus addition and renovation project. That matures in fiscal year 24. So fiscal year 25, we would expect to see a major reduction there. So those are highlights of changes to the budget, the current budget, and for the proposed year. A couple other statistics that are central to budget planning. Our enrollment figure is down somewhat, and it's we're seeing this across the state, largely attributed to the pandemic, and we're seeing the largest reduction in enrollment at the preschool level. So I've heard a lot of explanations for why that would be, but that's certainly happening across the state, and hopefully we see that recover as this pandemic passes. And then finally, of the employment, we do have a reduction in employment, and when we look at where that's coming from, it's really small changes in almost every site. It's not layoffs. It's things like the Title I grant having been reduced, and we've had a reduction in some internship positions. We've discussed at the board level reductions at the Career Center, and that's largely due to a substantial drop in enrollment. But in general, we're looking at vacancies and changes in grant-funded programs. We're not looking at any layoffs that is attributed to this. So this figure is still a very stable projection for employment. The last thing on the major changes is just the reference to our capital plan, and we can go over that if you have questions, but that's also on the website as well. So there's the overview, and then the projected tax rate I mentioned here, this $707 based on the state's funding formula is our estimate. It's actually now $703, a little bit less, but you can see that that is lower than it has been for the last couple of years. So that's what I had in mind for an overview. Had to answer questions or
Yes,
someone else.
thank you, Frank. So if anyone has a question, please, again, as I said, go to the reactions button on the bottom of your screen and raise your hand, and we will find the right person to provide the information. Sean Murphy?
Yeah, thank you. I would just like to say it's been a really interesting development process for Frank and the administrators to put this budget together. And if you remember, the yield number has changed. A number of different things have changed. The equalized student numbers have changed. And I would just have a compliment the finance department of the WSESD for doing such an incredible job. I've been looking at the things go along, and at the overall budget actually grew more favorable as time went on, which is quite heartening. So it's just a comment. So thank you.
Thank you. Mark Tully.
Hi. My question is, if next week at the ballot, people vote to dissolve the district and also vote this budget down, will the preparation of new budgets for 2022, new proposals, stay a centralized district process with the district board, or would that process then switch over to local control with new local school boards?
If both of those eventualities happen, this board still being in having the authority to manage these districts would continue. We would go back to the table and revise the budget and present it again for public approval. I think it's reasonable to expect it would be a year or more for a transition to take place before local boards would take over, assuming that those election outcomes happen. So this board remains in authority until legally replaced. It's a very long and complex process. It took 3 years for the mergers to take place. So unraveling them might even take longer, but there's no way to know. It's all hypothetical. But
Okay.
The first question, this board would have to take it up. We'd have to revise it and take it up again.
And if it were voted down, how would you go about assessing the intention of the voters in voting it down when you prepare a new process?
Well, I think whatever input we got from this meeting and any other ways, what we hear, we also have leadership councils in all the schools, which have connections with the communities that could share that information. But primarily, we ask the administrators, since they have had to do this before, we would ask them to provide us with a list of options. So we would choose from them based on our reading of what the community's values are and what the communities would want to protect and would be willing to try to get along without.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you. Other questions on the budget? Please raise your hand. I'll be glad to recognize you. I see your hand, Alan. I just want to, and I will call on you. I just want to point out to everyone else that I can't see all 81 people here. So if you're raising your hand and you're not on the 25 that are on my screen, I'm not going to see it that way. So please go to the bottom of your screen, click on the reactions icon, and then raise your hand. So Alan, go ahead.
So just about your instructions here, when I click on reactions, I see something that looks like clapping and something looks like thumbs up. Nothing looks like raising my hand. Do you, does it matter which one you do, or?
That may be if
It's in part.
that may be a misfunction or an upgrade that you need to do on Zoom. Earlier, your hand did show up.
David,
Okay.
I think you just have to, instead of that, they have to go to, they have to click on participants. And then there will be 3 buttons. Once they click on that, they'll see
excellent.
everybody. And then it'll say invite, mute, meet, and raise hand.
Thank you, Emily. So that's the trick, Alan.
Okay,
Click on participants.
I have another question though.
Yes, go ahead.
It's more to the budget. In the past, as a voter in good standing in Putney, I would receive a town report which had the school budget and lots of information about the school in it. This year, I didn't receive anything in the mail. And obviously, it sounds like if I had been with it enough, I could have gotten all the information that I got last year by looking at your website. But I'm wondering what the school is doing to proactively encourage people to find out the information that they used to get by reading their town reports.
My understanding, and it's not formal, is that the timing of the school district postcard was after the Putney information about how to get your ballots went out. But Andy, do you have any factual or solid understanding of why that worked out the way it did? Other towns got a notice to order that they needed to ask for both ballots.
No, I think, Frank, do you recall when the town reports were submitted and distributed?
Yeah, so Barb had the printing done shortly after the board approved the budget. And the annual reports are actually distributed to the schools and the town offices a couple of weeks ago. And if you are looking for a hard copy, and if the hard copies are out, you can always call central office and we can make arrangements for more to be distributed. So the school district annual report, it's this thing here, and it's very similar to the reports you were seeing, Alan, in the past. This one happens to be a 96-page report. It includes the CPA audit as well. And the financial reports in the annual report are more on the summary level. So if you want to get into the line items for each budget spending account, that report is also available. It's online now. It's a 150-page report, but you can go into that report. There's a table of contents in the summary of this annual report that tells you what page. You know, if you're looking for the Putney school, the central school, you could pretty quickly navigate through that resource. That 150-page report, we also are making it available for anyone who makes a request. So again, Barb Nowakowski at the central office is prepared to distribute those as requests come in. We just didn't want to print up a tremendous amount of documents and have them not utilized, but we can do those very quickly.
So I guess I just want to say, which I've said to many people over the last couple of years, my big fear of having this union district is that the voters will be less involved. And I would strongly encourage the new board that's elected next week to work very hard on getting as much information as possible to voters ahead of next year's town meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan. Jody Normando?
Hi, David. Thanks for taking my questions. I just want to say before I ask a question that your annual report only came to our town office Friday. So it really isn't 2 weeks away or anything like that. It's just happened. What I'd like to ask Frank, I guess, is what is the proposed tuition rate at the high school? And what is the rate that we are paying as a member of the high school?
Okay. So the tuition rate for fiscal year 22 is 16,500. And, every public school announces an elementary and a secondary tuition rate by January 15. The announced tuition rate, it is a regular ed tuition, and it is regulated by the statutes as to what is included and what is not. So that 16,500 does not include special education services or transportation. Those are the primary things that are excluded. It also does not include the Career Center costs or any of the costs associated with federally funded programs like the Title I academic support. You had a second question about how much does the high school pay
No.
in tuition?
How much does it cost? Can you tell us what it costs to send our students to the high school right now per pupil cost? Can you break that down?
So you're asking, like, for example, a Dummerston ninth grader going to BUHS, what does that cost?
What is it a cost to Dummerston? Yes, please.
Yeah. So it's no different in Dummerston than it is in Guilford, Putney, or Brattleboro. All towns share in the same cost, and that cost, if you want, I can go back to the annual report, but you can see that number on the tax page, and it is also the number that I was just highlighting, the 19,300. So, and that is the basis of setting the tax rate for, Dummerston, Guilford, Putney, and Brattleboro. It's there is no difference from one town to another.
Thank you, Frank.
Sure.
Julian Love?
Hi, thank you. First, I just wanted to ask a clarifying question before I went more into some of my comments. So the first question is that from when I was reviewing the budget, it looks like on the top of page 40 and 5 lines down, there's a budget for $69,000 for SRO positions within this district, and that's the same amount as 2020 and 2021. I wanted to ask if this is solely for Brattleboro Union High School, because it looked like the other schools within this this district do not have SROs at their school. So first, that's my clarifying question. I'd like to know if that is true or not.
Yes, you are correct. Yes.
Okay.
And it also, you may have another question. I don't want to interrupt, but if I could just say, because I'll forget, Jody Normando's previous question, it just illustrates a regular ed tuition of 16.5 and then the total cost of 19.3. That difference reflects including all costs versus just regular ed. So when we add in transportation and special ed, remember, special education is nearly 20% of our total enrollment. So no surprise that you would see a figure of somewhere around $3,000 or $4,000 per student in terms of the difference.
Thank you, Frank. And Jody, if you want to respond, that's fine. We're going to finish.
I actually had
ask her next question.
Sorry, is
ahead,
that for me?
Yes, go right ahead.
Okay, thank you. So the thing that I really want to be able to speak on right now is I guess I want to point out to everyone, and I would hope that you've been paying attention to this, but there are nationwide efforts to not only defund police, but also remove SROs from schools. And for anyone who's not sure on that language, it's school resource officers. We have youth in this community who have been speaking out and very active. And one of those places was on the Brattleboro Community Safety Review Committee, where they were sharing about the direct harm that they experienced through having interactions with school resource officers at Brattleboro Union High School. And while we may not have come to previous meetings to speak on this, part of that is just due to, honestly, a lack of awareness. I think a couple people have mentioned that there should be increased efforts in communicating with the public and making sure that we are aware of all the opportunities that are available for us to raise our voices. But we are doing that now, and we understand that might be pretty late in this process, but this is really important. That budget that is in line with previous years allows somebody who, even if they as an individual is a good person, that role that they have is one that does cause harm to youth, and more specifically to BIPOC youth and those who are differently abled. There is a lot of data out there that supports this. There's a lot of information on that. There are youth who would provide testimonies on it, and there are youth who are currently in the school who likely would not feel as safe publicly speaking on this due to them still having to have direct interactions. So I want everyone to be aware of that and know that youth will be continuing to speak up on this, not only here today, but in the future. If the school board does dissolve and it becomes more localized, we would like for youth to be able to have a position on that new school board so that they can make sure that youth voices are adequately being represented and heard and valued. Yeah, pretty much, I do find it really, really quite shameful that this budget was just moved forward as is, in line with previous years when there's already so much discussion. And even if we weren't here to speak to you directly, for people who are you are school board representatives, your decisions impact the youth, and there should have been a level of awareness and discussion and invitation to elevate youth voices and hear from those who are being directly impacted. So youth do not really want SROs in their schools, and it's a shame that it is that this budget is going to allow that for future years. Thank you.
Thank you, Jillian. I think you're probably aware that there's a bill in the Vermont legislature to explore that as well. And I hope that the students will come and address the board so we can have that information. We haven't invited them. We've had a lot of other things we've done a lot of work toward diversity and equity. That's not one of the things that has come up, but the research you cite is absolutely correct, and it is an issue that the community needs to talk about. So hopefully we'll hear from students as time goes by. I have it says on my screen is ZT. So I don't know your name, I apologize, but if you'd like to speak, please go right ahead.
Hi, I'm Z. I graduated BUHS last year, and I'm just gonna kind of piggyback off of what Jillian was saying and just kind of talk about my experience with SROs and for moving forward and just thinking about when we're making budget decisions. In the mornings when I would walk to school, the SROs would be standing outside of the building. And each morning I was intimidated and it felt like I was walking into a prison. And there's a narrative that police are here to help and protect people, yet there's very little discussion about how that doesn't always happen, especially in communities of color. And the truth is that police can cause trauma, and I have police trauma myself. And I felt threatened to have SROs in my school because they're in full uniform with a strapped belt. And I was scared to think of them violently intervening in situations. And I'm not sure what the purpose of SROs in our schools are, but people have used school shootings to justify them in schools, but there have been studies and experiences of SROs having zero impact on stopping school shootings. And with SROs, this upholds the cycle of systemic racism and oppression in relation to the school to prison pipeline, which disproportionately affects students of color. And studies show that students who are punished with suspension and expulsion are statistically expected to drop out, be in jail or prison in the next coming years of their life. And by keeping SROs in school, this is sending the message that you don't care about the students' well-being and safety and experiences, and it makes the school be labeled as a punitive institution. And this topic is directly about understanding and acknowledging trauma that youth face and have experienced. And we need way more mental health crisis responders and counselors and therapists in our school that SROs could be replaced with, because there is so many students in BUHS facing serious mental health issues and illnesses that they're not being supported on. And I know that we do have a restorative justice program in BUHS that I have been involved in facilitating when I was there. And I did find it counterproductive a lot of the time, because students were forced to go as an alternative to being suspended or expelled, and it didn't offer many student engagement, and it wasn't a very helpful process. And I've also witnessed SROs joining into restorative justice meetings strictly for intimidation and creating punitive and a fearful environment for restorative justice circles. And we can't support restorative justice in our school when there are SROs creating unsafe space. And the restorative justice programs also seriously need to be improved. And this is an important conversation that directly impacts youth and the school community. And I don't believe there should be any decision making without the youth having a voice in this conversation. So I just wanted to say that. Thank you.
Thank you, Z. I see Mr. Perrin and Superintendent Skarzinski have their hands up, and I expect that they would like to comment on this topic, so I'm going to go directly to them. Mr. Perrin.
Our SRO program at the high school is certainly an anomaly in the nation. It is not a traditional SRO program. It is based on the practices of diversionary practices and restorative justice. We work closely with the Windham County Sheriff. We have for 16 years. Every time we have a new SRO, I meet with the sheriff. We vet the person. We give them a trial period. We make sure that that SRO placement is one that is somebody who is not going to seem intimidating to students, somebody who the students can relate to. And for several years, that person was then Deputy Anderson, who's now Sheriff Anderson. We rely on that relationship with the sheriff and with the deputy to make sure that they understand the supportive stance we're looking for in the SRO. It is true our SRO is in the public spaces in the school. They're meant to welcome kids, not to intimidate. It is not true that the SRO is out front every day. They rotate by design where they are. Different mornings are at different places in the building, depending on where they're needed, also depending if they're meeting with people. Our SRO is an integral part of our school community. They work closely with our counselors, nurses, and case managers for IEP and 504 students. They know many of our students and their parents very well. They routinely reach out to parents to help them navigate social services. Our SROs work to find temporary and long-term housing for homeless students, siblings, parents, and families. Often we'll see missing students advertised online. Those missing student issues are usually solved due to the extensive knowledge that our SROs have from their extensive relationships with kids. They know where students might go, they know where they're going to turn to, and they coordinate very closely with other law enforcement agencies to return people safely to their placement or to their family. When a student commits a criminal offense on campus, our SRO works with the family to chart their next steps. It is not a punitive approach. They advocate with the state's attorney to craft restoration, restitution, diversion, and appropriate counseling as needed. They serve as an informal legal resource for the administration at BUHS and BAMS as well. We often have informal discussions about cases to get a sense of possible avenues that we can use to support our families. I have a great respect for the Brattleboro Police Department, and they do a stellar job working with our students. However, they do lack the history and relationship that an on-site school resource officer conveys to our community. Our SRO works incredibly hard to get to know our students. That familiarity is critical when we have a student who's escalated. They work very closely with students in trauma. They work very closely with students who escalate easily. And they also work very well with students who live in dangerous conditions to make sure they remain safe in school and outside of school. There is an unfortunate stereotype of SROs and SRO programs that BUHS does not represent. Vermont is a small state. Data gathered nationally does not bear on Vermont and our results with our SRO program. In restorative justice, our SROs are not forced in. They do not go uninvited. They are there at the invitation of the victim. They are there at the invitation of the facilitator. When in a restorative process, our SROs simply serve the same role that an administrator, counselor, or other adult serves in that meeting. They are there to share the story. They are there to help craft a restorative process that the student can return to school. The number one role of our SRO and their number one goal is to keep our kids in class. I do note that Sheriff Anderson is present. I don't know, Mr. Chairman, if you'd like to let him speak as well. I'll leave it up to you. But I know there's a lot of controversy about SROs. I would urge people to talk to me, talk to Sheriff Anderson, talk to Superintendent Skarzinski before you pass a snap judgment on our program here at BUHS. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Andy, your hand is down now.
I took it down. I think Steve said it more eloquently than I ever could, and more passionately. I do think it's important. I think Steve raised the point that if there are situations where an SRO is involved and needed, we have to remember that this is probably perhaps one of the worst days in a student's life. And we have to guide our decisions and our staffing by how are we supporting our students, and having that officer that may know the student, may know the child is a critical function of that. I'll defer to Steve, but I would urge us to pause on rushing to judgment, conduct the research, and have conversations rather than rush to judgment. We know that Vermont is a unique state where national norms don't tend to apply here frequently, given the size and the scope of the state. And so we have to make sure that we're not necessarily taking national norms and national trend data and applying them in totality to the state of Vermont.
Thank you, Andy. I'm a little bit, what I'm going to do is let people speak. And I noticed that Ann Schroeder has your hand up, but I need to see it on the screen too, so you can get in the row. Okay, on the bottom of your screen, there, it's on check for participants, click on participants. And okay, you got it, great. You're not next though. So I just wanted to clarify that. Now we're talking about this, we're getting public response and public input on our budget. And I am not going to stop this conversation because it does relate to the budget, but it also, obviously there are 5 people in line, all of them, I believe, probably want to address this. So I'm going to go down the line as they came, and Sheriff Anderson, I'm trying to respect the order rather than ignore your input, which I'm sure will be valuable. So I'm going to go to Anne Louise next, please.
Great. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Wonderful. My name is Anne Louise. I use she, her pronouns. I'm in Brattleboro, and I'm feeling frustrated and also sick to my stomach as I hear the 2 responses that just were put forward after Z, as a former student, shared. The asking to not make snap judgments and not kind of make assumptions based on the national research. You've just heard an example of someone who is willing to be vulnerable and name their own experience. And so if we say that we're striving to have the SROs not be intimidating, you just heard that language named by a former student. And so in addition to the problematic and the harm that just happened in this moment, I also, Steve, you were reading from a statement, and I almost wish that I had something written and prepared, but you need to make sure that you're listening to Z to the other students that will be speaking up and who have been speaking up, and recognize that we can't just say that we're trying to do things differently here in Brattleboro, that there's still an impact, there's still harm, and we can't disregard that. Yeah, we just need to be listening to the youth, giving them the voice. This is about them and their learning and education. And when students of color are speaking up and saying that they don't have the support and the space that feels like they're able to learn and be supported, then we need to listen and adapt accordingly. So I just encourage, as there's continued sharing and responses, to really listen to the folks that are being vulnerable and sharing their own experience, which can't be denied or set aside as a part of a national narrative. It is local students speaking. And let's just recognize the privilege to be able to actually listen to them, and that they're willing to speak here and in many other contexts. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne Louise. Trinity.
Hi, I'm also a graduated student of BUHS, and I wanted to add some comments specifically on the notion that there is a community with the RSO. And I want to say that within the whole 4 years of my high school experience, I never even learned the first name of a man who was walking around the school with a gun, or any of the resource officers. And the idea that they're there to keep people in class, when that isn't at all what students witnessed and saw in the hallways. And I think it's really important that when talking about community, you aren't talking down and invalidating the feelings of a member of the community that you're supposed to be directly supporting. And that's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Robin Morgan.
Hello. I just wanted to comment in support of what these students are bringing up about the possibility of considering not continuing to fund the SRO position. I think that a lot of the stuff that Mr. Perrin brought up about the valuable things that the resource officer is contributing are not the things that you need a police officer for, okay? If we need people to build relationships with students, if we need people to support students in their restorative justice situations, if we need people to make sure students have safe housing, safe living situations, and help them with other life support things, those are the jobs of a counselor or social worker, not a policeman. So I would suggest that this money be put towards funding restorative justice, counseling, and social work, not a police officer. Okay, a police officer's job is addressing crimes, not supporting kids and families. And I know that a lot of our police officers have been tasked with doing that work, but that is not an appropriate use of a police officer. And we have many skilled professionals whose job that is, who could be hired to do this work, or who could have their position increased if they are not already at a full-time role. Secondly, I just want to ask anyone who thinks that Vermont is different than the rest of the nation to do a little bit more research on that. Vermont is actually much worse than the rest of the country in terms of disparities in policing. And it's something that flies under the radar a lot because people of color are such a low percentage of our population here. But if you look at all of the data that's come out, I mean, even Brattleboro, which we think of as being, so progressive, Brattleboro drivers are 784% more likely to be stopped for traffic stops than white drivers, okay? And so I think we need to take a step back from saying that this isn't a problem here, disparities in policing or things like that. Let's just do some research and see where we actually stand and consider putting this money towards support professionals, not cops. Thank you.
Thank you, Robin. Mark Anderson.
Good evening. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Thank you. So Mark Anderson, Windham County Sheriff. As Mr. Perrin introduced me, I was a former school resource officer at the high school. I was born and raised here in Brattleboro, and now I'm your sheriff. I want to first off thank the people before me who've spoken to this. It doesn't fall on deaf ears for me. When I consider the school resource officer position, there's a lot of powerful work that I think is performed. And when we look at a school facility, I think it's appropriate to look at it as a microcosm of our community. We've noticed through many social services benefits for cohesion and integration of various different shared platforms with different perspectives, different interests. And from the perspective of the Sheriff's Office, we are one of the few organizations in the state that integrates with a variety of services. In fact, almost all of the services that have been mentioned today, in addition to more. Many services that children and their families do come into contact with are sometimes locked in silos. And often it is because of the various hats that that law enforcement has been put in, that we have connections to be able to connect students and families with resources. To that point, one of the reasons that I would say that we have such a unique program here at the Brattleboro Union High School is because ultimately our goal has been from the beginning that we put students' access to education first. We are not there as a crime fighter. I think it was suggested that law enforcement is solely law enforcement. That's not entirely true. There's a variety of things that we do, and there are conversations, relevant conversations, that discuss what we should and should not be responsible for. To that point, we have looked at a variety of data, including the Brattleboro's Community Safety Review. A concern I have out of that report is that it actually identifies information solely related to the Brattleboro Police Department. My department is an entirely separate entity. The reports and data from my office regarding traffic stop data show actually statistically insignificant levels of people and minorities who are stopped. So we actually have trouble measuring disparities because such few people or minorities are stopped by my department. We have taken on a variety of training within my agency, from fair and impartial policing, bias-free policing, anti-racism, non-escalation training, de-escalation training. We do a lot of different stuff, and we do that because we believe, we truly believe that our community, that we are part of it, and that we are all in this together. I know this is a budget meeting, so I won't go on too much longer, simply to say that my department has reached out to a research organization to see if we could actually measure disparity issues with relation in regard to the school resource officer program here in Brattleboro. This was a project we started about 2 years ago. And the problem that we recently learned is that the data regarding disparities has been so small that they don't feel that they can actually measure this. So my department is going to be meeting with them in the near future to actually work out a way that we can measure this. And I'd like to invite that conversation at another time where we can discuss what should and should not be done with the school resource officer program rather than discuss it in this budget meeting today. So I do invite people to that in the future. I don't have a date for when that will occur. I'm happy to answer questions about it, but thank you for the time.
Thank you. Bethany Ranquist, and then Ann Schroeder, if you'd like to speak, you'll be next. Great. Bethany, go ahead, please.
Hi. I appreciate what everybody's saying, and I appreciate this conversation. I do think it's budget related, as this is an item in the budget, but I also think that this clearly is a conversation that needs a lot more in-depth looking at and discussion. So I would encourage the school board to continue having this on the agendas going forward, but I also would really like to see this continue this evening as long as needed. My comment or my thought about this is that I think it very much seems like there's a mix-up in the concept of intention versus impact. And I think that there's definitely good intention on the part of, I want to assume that there's good intention on the part of the school and, and the sheriff's office and all involved in, reasoning for why there needs to be SROs. But I also think that it's really important to pay attention to what the impact of that is, because regardless of how well-intentioned something is, if the impact on any person or specifically larger group of people, which we're hearing from students tonight, and I'm sure that they're not the only students that this is having an impact on, if the impact is such that it doesn't line up with what the intention is, then I think that the impact needs to be what is more important. So if the presence of SROs in schools are causing an impact that is negatively affecting our students, I feel like those voices need to be listened to very, very loudly and clearly, and it's our responsibility to look at, does the intention of this, is it out of line with what the impact is, and really, how far does that impact go? I think that's really important to keep in mind. And I say that specifically because I want to say that I really want to believe that nobody is putting SROs in school because they want to create a situation that is, negative for students. I believe that the intention on the part of the school, on the part of, any of the administration, on the part of even people who vote for the budget, that the intention is that they will help with safety of the school. I just think that as soon as we hear that there is an impact that is counter to that, it's our responsibility to listen to that and to take any and all steps possible to make sure that that impact stops happening. Thank you for the.
Thank you, Bethany. Ann Schroeder.
Okay, I got it. I'm sorry, I never did this. I'm an older person. I never did this participant thing here. Anyhow, I am here to support the students. And I think we should listen to more of the students about this. And when Mr. Perrin said Vermont is different from other states, and he was saying, oh, the national data. Well, here's some Vermont data. Black students in Vermont were 5.4 times more likely than their white peers to be arrested in schools. And it's not just affecting people of color. Students with disabilities in Vermont were nearly 2 times more likely than their peers without disabilities to be arrested in schools. And Black boys with disabilities in Vermont face the highest overall arrest rate. And Black girls in Vermont, this is really surprising to me, are the most disproportionately represented in school arrest, 5 times the rate of their white peers. Now, this is not Brattleboro specific, and I agree with people that have said the intentions are probably good, but this is what's happening in Vermont. So that's all. I just want to support the students. Thank you.
Thank you, Ann. Wade Morrow. You'll need to unmute, Mr. Morrow.
There we go.
Yes.
I want to echo Alan Blood's concern about the lack of information in regard to the upcoming votes, both a week from now and in terms of the school district itself. There have been so many bits of information thrown around, which I can't confirm or otherwise determine whether they're accurate. And I truly am embarrassed for the school board in terms of the lack of communication that's gone on in all of the towns. Putney is certainly one of them from our point of view, but not the only one, of course. Thank you.
Thank you. Julian Love.
Hi, I guess I have a question before I start, because I know I spoke earlier, so I wasn't sure if it's okay to respond to anything on a personal level. And then I also had a statement that I wanted to share on behalf of someone else who sent this to us, so it's not me speaking.
I think the only caution I would offer, Jillian, is if you're gonna mention someone else, you probably particularly, or well, probably if you can keep it to your personal perspective, that would probably be my best
Well,
advice.
this is a statement that was written to us in support of this, just from people who could not be present today.
Fine. Yeah, great.
Okay, cool. Thank you. So this is from the Education Justice Coalition of Vermont. And it states, the Education Justice Coalition of Vermont stands in full support of the youth working to get police out of their school in Brattleboro. We urge the school and city leaders to center the voices of youth most impacted by police in schools, which includes youth of color, LGBTQIA+ youth, and youth with disabilities. Please take their lead in determining how to remove police from schools and what systems and roles to invest in to make schools safe and inclusive for all students. While school leaders, parents, and police may tell you that police in schools make students safer, research indicates that that is just not the case. For example, a recent study indicates that the presence of armed officers increases mortalities at school shootings, finding that there were 3 times as many people killed when there was an officer on the scene who was armed. Another study looked at the impact of increased SRO presence and found that increased SROs increased the number of drug and weapon-related offenses and inclusionary disciplinary actions for treatment schools relative to comparison schools. Therefore, evidence indicates that having police in schools actually leads to less safety rather than more. More than half a dozen schools in Vermont have or are actively working to remove police from schools, including Burlington, Winooski, Montpelier, Champlain Valley Union Schools District, and St. Albans. We encourage Brattleboro to learn lessons from this important work being done and to follow local youth leadership. Thank you.
Thank you, Jillian. Ricky Davidson.
Hi, David. Thank you. I wasn't planning on speaking tonight, but 2 pieces I wanted to just bring up. As an employee at the high school, as somebody that works in the counseling department, my experience in the last couple of years as a staff person in the building has seen our SRO be somebody who's connecting with youth that other adults are having a hard time connecting with. And it's somebody who takes a kid that just needs to move for a walk or something like that, and is somebody that helps to de-escalate and process with somebody. So that's, I've seen more positive, which I think is more the intention than what some people experience have had. I also want to say, as I'm a member of the Leadership Council at the high school, and I'm the chair of the Leadership Council, and I would encourage this conversation to continue with the Leadership Council too, as well, so that we can answer questions, get questions answered for ourselves, because I think that members of the Leadership Council will probably have questions that many school board members would have, and be able to gather some information and be able to share that. So the Leadership Council might be a way in which we can hear more youth voices and get more of a connection to what's going on. So I just wanted to offer that up. People can reach out to me specifically, and we can work on getting that onto our agenda for further conversation. But
thank you, Ricky, and thank you for pointing out that that's a structure that the board has put in place since we formed, so that people do have a place to go and have their voices heard. So thank you. Kelly Young.
David, actually, I do want to speak, but I want to make sure that everyone else has an opportunity to. So I'm happy to wait until everyone else has an opportunity to speak. Thank you.
As of this moment, Kelly, you're the only one with the hand up.
Okay. So I want to say, I remember a few years ago when I was on the Guilford School Board, in a number of meetings, we were focused on the safety of the school, including upgrades and changes to the building and plans in the event that something happened which might result in some sort of lockdown or crisis situation. They made actual structural changes. They moved places. We talked about security cameras. We talked about a lot of stuff. And I think that probably all the other school boards were probably thinking about these same sort of things. And so I remember the concern about people's safety, including students, staff, administration, parents, or other family members or community members who happen to be at the school or in the vicinity if something happened. We never know when there's going to be an event that will happen. If we did, we would all be more prepared, and crisis in and around schools would never happen. I do feel that it is important for the resource officer to have a good connection with the students, to be able to make students feel safe, and that the resource officer is someone to be relied on and to turn to in times of crises and in times of non-crises. If there are behaviors there that are making students feel unsafe, those should be addressed. If students have trauma, regardless of from where it derives, that should be addressed. I think it makes sense to look to ways in which we can address these, such as training, seminars, etc. I think that those are ways in which we can expand work to draw back on, so we don't have to draw back on the environment of those days. The fear and the panic and the concern and the that I think many people were probably feeling. I know that the school board in Guilford was feeling concern, but I wouldn't like I would never want something to happen and then to wish that we had done more, whether that is having a resource officer, making sure that we work on things, if ways to make students feel safe, ways to make them feel like school is a safe place for them to come to, that the teachers, that the administration, that everyone there is someone that they can turn to in a time that they need to, or they can just, that they can feel safe there. And I really feel like if the resource officer is in any way, the position is making students not feel safe, I don't feel like removing that is the way that we should move. I think we need to look at why it is. We need to look at the basis for that. And I think that those are the ways that we need to address it. I would love to I look forward to hearing ideas that people have that might help us to move forward on this issue towards a goal of everyone feeling safe.
Thank you, Kelly. Olivia Stent?
Hi, my name's Olivia, obviously. I am an alumni from BUHS, and I just wanted to add again that the fact that there have been current students, I am an alumni, so I can vouch for them, who have already spoken, have already raised their concerns that yes, it's not if students are feeling unsafe as a result of an SRO, it's a matter of fact that is happening right now and that has been happening. So I want to kind of emphasize the language that we're using, that it's not if, this is a matter of fact. And I would also like to add on that I think a huge concern is it's not so much the individual, I would say, from my experience at least, of the individual SRO that is sort of like the cause of concern here. I would say it's the fact that a person in uniform with a weapon is in our schools, and the fact that we're looking when, especially for folks as a part of like minority and especially African American and other BIPOC communities, constantly in the news and on television are people a part of those communities being brutalized by police. And that's happening constantly, and that's collective trauma. And having someone who is a police officer in schools is already going to make someone feel unsafe when they're used to people from their community being brutalized, and then those officers not being held accountable ever. So I think that's worth understanding, that it's not so much that you can ask one officer to act differently or exhibit different behaviors. It's the fact that they are a police officer in a school, and police have always been used to oppress and brutalize Black folks in this country. So I think that should be really understood when we're talking about where this fear is coming from and what the impact is.
Thank you. Andy?
Well, David, I was going to suggest, it's clear in the conversations that a broader conversation is really warranted. And there are passions on all, within all these, within the multitude of positions. I'm incredibly appreciative of the students that came to speak and the graduated students that came to speak. Their eloquence and their description of their feelings in the topic is absolutely, while it's painful to hear, it's something that we have to listen to and we have to respect their voices. I would encourage that perhaps the best solution at this point would be to plan a broader conversation and find a way to have a facilitated conversation on this particular topic. Whether we conduct that through the leadership councils or the diversity and social justice or the board social justice and equity committee or a larger conversation, I think it might behoove us to have a broader conversation where we can have a dialogue and a broader forum on this particular topic. It's clear that we have student voices that want to be heard on this. We do exist, and we do exist in service to our students and families. And we balance that with making sure that we're providing a safe environment for all parties involved and making sure that everyone can receive the best education possible. So I would suggest that, maybe you and I could perhaps talk offline at some point to figure out a way that we can have some level of a forum on this and have a broader conversation to encourage the voice to have a positive solution moving forward.
I welcome that idea. That's a great idea, Andy. The only thing I will add is that we'll talk about it, and I'd like to add a couple of some of the student voices as well, because their consciousness of the impact or the effects of this situation is just deeper and fresher than ours. So having them in on the ground floor of the conversation, I think, is warranted. There's another hand up. As I said, I'm not going to stop this conversation. But we do have a budget to respond to more if there are more questions, and we also have a second item on the agenda, which is public information about the warning articles around school district withdrawal. So having said that, Victoria.
Hi, yeah, I'm actually probably jumping ahead a little bit in your agenda because I'm interested in talking about those ballot questions. But before I do, I just want to say thank you to all of the students who bravely spoke up today. I think it's a testament to the education that you received and also just how empowered you feel as youth. So thank you for that. And I do think more conversation is necessary, and something I would love to see is representation of students on the school board, and if we continue as a unified district, on the leadership councils, because actually attending a meeting and actually being part of one of those groups is really quite different. And I think it would send a really strong message to show that you do care what students think and what the student experience is if they do have a seat at the table. So with that said, one of the things I would love to hear, and something actually my family and my neighbors are talking about, is why is withdrawal from the district even on the ballot now? It feels a little premature. It doesn't feel like we've got a lot of data.
Can I ask you, Victoria, can I ask you to hold? I'd like to ask you to hold it for that part of the agenda. We have a whole section of the agenda to deal exactly with that.
Okay, all right.
And we may move immediately to it. There may not be any more questions about the budget, but I'd like to try and finish that up first.
Sure.
Thank you. Bethany?
So I had a couple of questions about the budget, but I'm hesitant to ask them because I want to make sure that there's nobody else that needs to speak to the SRO questions. So I can ask them, but if other hands go up that need to talk about SROs, I'm happy to have my questions shelved and come back to after I don't need immediate answers to them. So I just want that really clear. My two budget questions. The first one was, I think that I heard Frank say that teachers' health insurance went up this year from 15% contribution to a 20% contribution. And I'm assuming that that is a union issue and not a localized one. But I was just wondering if we could get a little more information about that, because I feel like of all the years for us to expect teachers to pay more for their health insurance, the middle of the pandemic is not.
I'm glad to provide that information, Bethany.
No,
the legislature last
my question without you interrupting. I'd like to finish and then go ahead and say what you need to, but can I just finish my question, please?
Go ahead.
I'd appreciate the chance. Thank you. I would just appreciate the chance to finish saying what I'm saying, and then you are welcome to respond. My other question is, I also would like to know about whether or not, I don't think that I heard it mentioned, but I also would like to know what the numbers for this current budget are based on, because I know that there's a large number of students who have become remote and also potentially homeschooled as a result of the pandemic. And I'm curious if or how that will affect either this budget or in a positive or negative way. Is this based on last year's enrollment? Is it going to be based on this year? And how are we thinking that might be impacted going forward if parents who didn't used to homeschool have decided to homeschool and don't send their kids back because they've decided that it's fun to keep them home? So I'm just curious where that falls. Now I feel done. So if you'd like to respond, you're welcome to, and I appreciate you holding your thoughts until I was done.
Yeah, the question about the increase in the benefits was not, actually the union was involved in a negotiating process. And I think they prevailed, but the legislature nonetheless put us all the school districts, employees into one pool, and everybody pays the same thing. They set up a uniform system across the state. So we were removed from that process, and it had a negative fiscal impact on our staff, obviously. The question about the homeless students, I'm going to pass that on to Andy and Frank. I have some information, but I'm sure it's not as valuable as theirs.
Frank, I'll defer to you on the equalized pupil count and the homeless students.
Sure. As far as what the basis of the fiscal year 22 budget was built on, it always starts with the core programs that are required by the State Board of Education to be provided. And as most folks know, whether we have the same number of students coming back, or if it's up 3 or 4% or down 3 or 4%, generally that's not going to change the core programs that are required to be offered to our students. So when enrollment changes dramatically, then we do need to look at whether or not we can sustain those programs. This is not what we're seeing at this point. So enrollment changes for the next fiscal year are not different enough for us to be considering major funding changes or what is offered in our schools. Budget is always developed based on a sense of student need and obviously what the State Board of Ed requires public schools to provide, and then all the input that comes through leadership councils and community input. So I know that's a general response to your question, but I do think it's relevant.
Thank you, Frank. Bethany?
Yeah, I just wanted to throw in, I heard both you and Andy use the word homeless. I did not say homeless, I said homeschooled. So students that are homeschooled as a result of the pandemic and are either going to continue as homeschooled once the option of remote is no longer. That was my question. It did not have anything to do with homeless. So I just wanted to make sure that that word got changed when you were answering, in case it changed what your answers might be. And thank you, Frank. That was a perfect explanation. I really appreciate the very clear answer.
Thank you for clarifying that for me, Bethany. I apologize if I misspoke.
Thank you. Any other questions on the budget?
David, if I could, yes. Bethany's clarification, and yes, Bethany, I did understand you were referring to remote and then homeschool, but yeah, I do want you to understand that the number of students in that category, and you're absolutely right. Statewide, that has been quite a change under this pandemic. But even though it's quite a change, the number of students in our Windham Southeast School District region does not warrant a program cut or addition. We know that there will be a number of strategies as a result of remote learning and this shift. And I know the administrative leadership team is working very hard with Superintendent Skarzinski to address the learning challenges that we need to address. But from a budget point of view, again, the core programs are being sustained in this, and we're very pleased to hear that there's more federal support for supporting our students in the next 2 years now, is what we're hearing. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank. Before we shift to the next agenda topic, we've been meeting for an hour and 16 minutes. So we're going to take a 5-minute break. We'll go silent for 5 minutes and we'll be back at 7:21. Welcome back. We'll now go into the second part of our meeting. Michelle Green is going to take us through the document that was created by the Communications Council. I'm looking for it to put it on put it up on the screen. And I'll ask Michelle to take us through the document. I'll scroll up as you instruct. And we'll go right through start to finish, and then we'll take questions.
Okay. All right, David, do you have a copy that's not the draft? Just because it's a little distracting.
This is the most recent copy I have.
Oh.
If you have another, you can share it on your screen.
Yeah, let's see if I can do that successfully.
Okay, well,
I do.
I'll
I've never
stop
shared
that one so you
can. Actually, I'm afraid. I've never done this, and my computer's not set up to do it. I'm afraid that might be more problematic than we think. Okay, well, as long as it's the right one, or I can immediately forward it to you, if you want, is another option. It was on maybe it wasn't on today's agenda, but I just forward it to you right this second, David.
Yeah, I can get that up quickly.
It was on their website too. We've got it up in a few places. Okay, it should be there. Oh, no, maybe I sent you the agenda.
Well, that didn't come either.
Okay.
Not yet.
David Scholes, there we go. Yeah, we've now have this posted both under the voter information on our website, under the school board website, as well as on the front page of the WSESU, just so everyone knows if they want to follow along. Do you have it as an email?
Yeah, it's up, and I'll have it for you in a sec.
Thanks.
Let's see. Okay, now I have to share that. That should do it.
Thank you. I'm glad you're in charge of the technology.
Sure.
Okay, so I'm just going to go through this, and we can stop at each section as we wrap it up to make sure there aren't questions, rather than pile everything up. So on March 2nd, each of the towns, Brattleboro, Dummerston, Guilford, and Putney, that comprise the Windham Southeast School District will be voting on 2 questions. The first question that each town will see is, shall the voters of the town of, so your town, shall my town authorize my town to withdraw from the Windham Southeast School District? So that is just for your town to leave the school district. And I just want to be clear about that because I know there was some confusion about if this, about what the ballot question was really asking. The second question, shall the voters of my town conditionally approve and ratify the withdrawal of the towns of Brattleboro, Dummerston, Guilford, and/or Putney from the school district if they vote to do so? So those questions are 2 different topics. You do not need to, your answers can be different. You can support your town staying in the district and still support community choice, for instance, and vote yes on one and no on another. And it's just worth noting that the second question, all 4 towns would have to vote unanimously yes to allow any town that voted yes on the first question that wanted to leave the district to forward that motion and have go to the next step. Moving down a little bit, Vermont State Statute 16 VSA 724 allows towns that have voted to form a unified district to vote to withdraw from that district. The WSESD is a state-formed district, and there is no law that allows state-formed districts to withdraw. So I want to just clarify this because it came in sort of at the last minute. The WSESD is a state-formed district, which most of us is a pretty way of saying that we were a forced merge district. The statute, the legal pathway that allows one town to leave a district specifies in that statute that it's towns that have voted to withdraw. I have screens popping up for some reason, sorry. And so we just want to be clear that the legal pathway, we want it to be transparent because this information kind of came out at the very last minute as we were ready to distribute this information. The legal pathway that we would be pursuing, a town would be pursuing if they wanted to withdraw, would be through that statute. And while it is not specifically stated that it applies to state-formed districts, it also doesn't forbid them from making that request. And so we just want to be clear that it ultimately does come down to a decision made by the Vermont State Board of Education. They have the final authority on how to interpret that law. The law existed well before there was such a thing as a state-formed district. So it would be premature for us to assume anything. And ultimately, it comes down to the decision of the State Board of Education if something were to move forward and be presented to them. So I think that's pretty much that on that section. If there's any questions, I'll just give it a moment. Okay, so let's move on to the next page, David, about financial implications. Okay. What are the financial implications of a merged versus separate district? I want to just note the disclaimer, the budget implications of withdrawing from a unified 4-town merged district cannot be predicted precisely and are subject to voter results and individual community choices made in establishing a new independent school district. If the Windham Southeast School District were to continue to stay intact, basically our budget would continue as it currently exists. We would be voting on the budget that we've just presented to our voters, and we would move forward with no changes made to that. Currently, each school does develop their own budget, and it works together with our supervisory union, and that's how this board determines the necessary expenses that we ask voters to consider when they vote to support the budget. Moving over to what it would look like, any changes that would occur if there was a withdrawal from the WSESD. If a town is approved to withdraw from the WSESD, the new local school district would remain part of the Windham Southeast Supervisory Union. School districts are responsible for expenses of the WSESU and contribute funds proportional to their use and needs. If a town is approved to withdraw from the Windham Southeast School District, it may take some time to untangle our districts, including from a financial perspective. Currently, the WSESD budget does have separate budgets listed for each school, and this may help to give a general sense of what the basic expenses and debts are for each school's operations. This budget will include building maintenance and capital improvements. It is anticipated that there will be expenses related to a town's withdrawal from the district. Among other things, these expenses would be administrative and related to the transfer of financial obligations and accounts from the merged district to a newly formed district. Any towns that withdraws from the district will have an increase in spending per pupil if they continue providing the same services and programs as are currently available under the WSESD. That's an important sentence. This would result in an increase to the tax rate for that town and possibly for other towns remaining in the WSESD, with smaller districts feeling a greater impact and increase in tax rate. And I just want to put out there where that statement came from. What we did was we took the current budget that is being that was just presented to voters, and we just looked at the numbers as they present right now as part of this district, and then we took the identical budget for each school, and it was reconfigured as if they were standing as a freestanding district, and those were where those comparative numbers came from. If Dummerston, Guilford, or Putney withdraws from the WSESD, Brattleboro Area Middle School, Brattleboro Union High School would no longer be part of their local district. Tuition would have to be paid by the school district that students resides in to attend a designated school outside their new district. It could be BAMS, BUH, or another choice that a new school board would choose to send their students to. If Brattleboro withdraws, the status of BAMS and BUH is unclear. So to be clear, that's if just Brattleboro were to leave the Windham Southeast School District. If the WSESD is dissolved, so the entire district no longer exists, and all 4 towns are independent school districts. Pending financial agreement, BAMS and BUHS will become Brattleboro schools. Outlying towns would pay tuition for their students to attend BAMS, BUHS, or as we said, another school designated outside of their own town and the grades they offer. In the event of total dissolution of the WSESD, again, completely dissolved, future school districts can collaborate to establish a union high school subject to voter approval. That process would look like the future school boards from each town working together, determining a union to present to voters, and all 4 towns would have to vote unanimously and agree, and then we could see a unionized high school district come back, so we'd have a regional high school again. But until that process was done, those schools would be designated as Brattleboro schools and considered like out of network, basically. Tuition students would not have a board representation or ability to vote on the budget of schools outside their local district. Tuition students are accounted for in a school district budget. However, if an incoming student was not accounted for when the budget was approved, there is no reimbursement of state funds, and the town is responsible to pay the tuition for those students. Okay, do we have any questions on the financial implications?
Sean? You'll need to unmute.
Was I permitted to speak?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. I was looking at the bullet point that says that there will be an increase in cost. It was up sort of at the beginning of the page, or not at the beginning, but yeah, the anticipated the budget, any town that withdraws from a district will have an increase in spending. I was just wondering if we could get clarification about the state mandated cap on education spending. Maybe perhaps Frank would have a comment on how the cap, what is now the cap and how the cap would be different if it was separate districts? Thank you.
Frank, are you clear what Sean is asking?
Sure. Yeah, so the state sets a cap this year it's 18,736 per student. And that triggers essentially a tax penalty if a school budget is approved that is at a higher level than that. And I think what Sean is pointing out and has been discussed in the Finance Committee as well as the Communication Committee of the board is that when you break the Windham Southeast School District into separate pieces, you create a higher cost per student at different levels, at different school sites. And the reason for that is when you look at the school funding formula and the way the math works, it's in a unified system, it's all students are divided into a unified budget. That creates that $19,000 figure that we had talked about earlier. And then the state compares that to the threshold they set every year, and they determine whether or not there is a penalty to be assessed. In the unified school budget, because the debt that we also talked about was passed back in 2003, the part of the school funding formula exempts that debt payment from the spending threshold penalty. And when you break districts apart, it would only be the one entity. And in this hypothetical scenario, if you break apart what is now embedded in the unified union district, if you pull out Brattleboro Union High School, they'll continue to get the benefit of the exemption against that penalty, but that would not be shared. So right now it is shared because we're one district, but when you pull that exemption out and then subject the separate district to their own level of spending, that automatically triggers a spending penalty. And then we go back to what we were facing before the merger, and that is how do the or programs so that they stay under the cap. And that's by design, the Act 46 required districts to form of 900 students or more. And the funding formula lends itself to systems that are that size or larger. And it really is challenging when a district is smaller. So that's the issue that Sean is raising, is that the spending threshold, the penalty figure is triggered when we break our systems apart. That adds a tax liability. Under our current unified system, the exemption that's created from the old debt protects all of the systems, all the sites from that penalty.
Thank you, Frank. Alan Blood, then Jody Normando, and then Tara Castine.
Well, I'm confused about this high school stuff. Used to be that we had a local board and we had a union high school board. Was that high school board abolished when this Southeast district formed?
Yes.
So and would not automatically be reformed, would have to be reconfigured at some later date. So we would not be back in the situation we were in a year or two ago.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Jody?
Hi, I just want to comment on one of the unknowns, which there are many unknowns in this proposal. I just listened to what used to be Windham Central, I think it's West River or something now, as their legislators presented to them this last week, because their legislators are really pushing, and I think ours are too, for the weighted study. And the comment that came out of this time was they knew that they couldn't get everything done and it would probably take 3 years to do everything, but they think that they can get for this coming year right now, they can get the cap pulled off for that 1 year while they're working on this.
The penalty.
So it's just one of these things another one of these things that we do not know what's going to happen, and the finances and everything else are very, they're not definite at this stage of the game. Thank you.
Thanks, Jody. You'll notice that Frank described them as hypothetical, which means less than definite, less than certain. Robin Morgan.
Yes, thanks. I wanted to ask basically if the board or Frank could speak about how withdrawal will impact getting loans for the construction project that is planned at Academy School to address their space needs for working with students with individualized education needs.
I could speak to that if you like, David.
Yeah, go ahead, Frank, please.
Yeah, I've spoken with bank representatives, the government banking lending representatives, and the executive director of the Vermont Bond Bank. And they've indicated that after describing the situation to them, that they would need to see the formation of the successor entity being legally defined before they would enter into a lending agreement. So unfortunately, that means that depending on if this moves forward, the lending event, if that's the way we go, is contingent upon either the State Board of Ed or whatever oversight agency makes its determination about the legal status. Because their bottom line was, if there's ambiguity about who is going to pay back the loan, then they will wait for that ambiguity to be removed before they enter into an agreement. And then, of course, that's a common sense, of course. So if there is a change in legal status of Windham Southeast School District after town meeting, then I believe it will take time, more than this spring term, that in terms of what we had anticipated moving forward in.
Thank you, Frank. I also contacted the Vermont Bond Bank on the same topic to be really clear about it. And certainly they need to know who the counterparty is that they're going to be entering contracts with. There also is a process for districts that have cash on hand, which is us, for what he described as reimbursement resolution and statement of intent to pay ourselves back through lending after some designated time frame. So we would not be closed out completely from being able to go ahead with that project. We could use cash on hand with the intention, with an agreement to reimburse or a statement of intent and a reimbursement resolution going forward. So that option is not closed off, but it would be it would be clumsier for sure. Let's see, Kelly Young.
So I feel like there's a lot of anxiety, and based on the short amount of time that this kind of came up, and throwing information at people and no real, a lot of questions about it. So, we're talking about some details that I'm gonna try and pull the conversation back a little bit for a couple of questions. So if the towns all vote no, that they want to remain within the same district, then there will presumably be no change. We'd be going on as, you know, essentially business as usual as the district. If there was a dissolution and it was approved by the state, assuming that that would require some time to work out details, does that process allow the 4 towns to decide to reform at some point in the future if they decided that that was what they wanted to do instead? And or if during the period of time that it takes to achieve dissolution, is there a possibility that the towns can decide to stay formed if that's what they desire?
The wisest thing would be to refer all of that to our attorney. The one thing I could say is that there tends to be a statute for pretty much everything you want to do. And so you'd have to comply with whatever the statute's required. And frankly, I don't know that it's possible to answer those questions, Kelly.
I do think we have some information about that, Kelly. The first question, reforming an independent school district is a little bit different than the merging process. And so towns would vote and create a new school board. It wouldn't be a transitional board. It would actually be their next school board. And it would be, that would get them through a transitional period. In that time, their only authority, because the school would still be underneath the Windham Southeast School District, we would still be intact, is limited to creating a budget for that next school. And so the way that it seems to imply, I don't know if there's a way to make an appeal or anything like that, but the implication is that the only authority they have as sort of this floating school board that doesn't have a school is to create a budget so that they can go ahead and become an independent school district. And once they were in that position, they would move forward and be able to make decisions, other decisions for their school. The second question, did you say, were you asking if the towns separated and then decided to come back together, if that was something that could happen? Was that your question?
Yeah, that was more my, I mean, I feel like we are, I assume that the school board members as well are feeling the same thing that I would expect that many people in the towns are feeling, like, oh my gosh, we are sort of like short time period. We have to make a decision where this is moving very fast. And so what I was trying to just get an understanding, and I appreciate, David, your comment that really an attorney may have to answer this, but I guess I was trying to get a sense of whether our options are like sort of we're closed upon if this is the choice that we make. I just was trying to get a sense of whether I mean, I feel like when the towns made a decision and then the state said this is what you're going to do, even though it wasn't what the towns wanted, it took the towns were not given the choice. So now we've had a little bit of time as a formed district, and presumably if this did go forward, we would have a little bit more time working things through, and they would get maybe hopefully more of a sense of what a formed district would how it would represent the towns and be good or negative or whatever it is, and so they could make a better comparison. I feel like people are maybe having a challenge making a comparison to decide what they want to do. And I could be wrong, but I think, and so was just trying to get a sense of whether if they make this decision, if their options in the future, if they then say, actually, we really appreciated being together as a district, and we would like to reform, or whether in the 4 towns or a couple towns or however it was. But if they had the options to make that choice in the future, if they felt that that was going to better serve their towns.
Thanks, Kelly. Again, I think, obviously towns can always petition their select boards to have a revote. As far as the rest of that, I think it would be very difficult to be clear. Sean?
Okay.
Thank you. I've been studying this Windham Southeast School District preliminary homestead tax rate form quite extensively. And one of the things I notice on that is the equalized pupil number that Frank referred to earlier of 2,263 students. So I was wondering if there could be some input from I guess it would be from Frank, on the volatility of the equalized student number as a single district as opposed to a unified district.
The administration is interrogated.
Sure. Yeah, that's something that was very familiar with the individual school boards prior to the merger. In that, for example, in Guilford, if you have a 120 student student body in grades K through 6, and you had let's say a 10 student variation from one year to the next. 10 students is not so much that the school board is going to be able to, say, lay off a classroom teacher. So you're going to generally keep your same staff and your same cost structure. But if you have a change in enrollment, and we have seen those numbers like that, somewhere between 8 and 10%, that goes directly to the tax rate. So variations in small school enrollments have sort of exponential impact on the tax rate. And I say exponential because if it pushes the school budget into that penalty zone above the threshold, then that's what makes it exponential. It's you add a dollar for every dollar that you spend over the cap, and unfortunately, that is common in schools where you have a community of less than 200 students. You see those variations from one grade level to another. Most folks that have kids in schools know that in any of our elementary schools, you could have a third grade class with 20 kids and a fourth grade class with just 8 kids. And that, when you're a small school, you can't share grade level teachers to smooth out that variation, and it really spikes the tax rates. In a larger system like the Windham Southeast School District, the unified system, when you have 2,200 kids, we just don't see that level of change, 10% changes in enrollment. We see 1, 2, or 3% changes in enrollment, it just is a much more stable calculation as it relates to the school funding formula.
Thank you, Frank. Bethany Ranquist and then Jane Guidell. And I would ask people please to put your hand down and remute after you've spoken, please. Thank you. Bethany and then Jane.
Hi, Bethany Ranquist, Brattleboro again. I have a request that I have yet in any of these meetings to have seen happen. And that is, I know we've talked a lot about leadership councils and the lack of getting information from them and input from them for this, but I would really love to hear very directly this evening from the principals of the schools who are here attending this meeting on what the impact at their individual schools will be and their sense of the impact of this overall on the district, because I feel like aside from teachers, they're the biggest stakeholders in this. And I think that my understanding is they have not been encouraged to share their thoughts. And I would really like to hear that. I don't think there's any reason at this point, if we're hearing the school board members start to say what their thoughts are about this, I don't think there's any reason that the principals shouldn't be allowed to share their thoughts about how this would impact their individual schools as well as the district. So I know that I have seen a few of them on the participants list, and I would encourage them hopefully to be willing to share that. And I also would request that they have the ability and the space to do that without being stopped by a need for some sort of political correct reason, because I think that at this point we need to hear what their thoughts are.
And any principals that would like to comment, this is a public meeting. Obviously, your questions are welcome. Bethany, would you please lower your hand? Thank you. Just put up your hands if you'd like to share your perspective on what this vote would mean to your school. You're more than welcome to participate. Jane, go ahead, please.
Hi, so I teach at Academy, and I'm also a parent in the district at Academy. And I just wanted to respond to Kelly and other people who feel like this vote is rushed and you really need to make a decision now. And just say, from everything I've heard, it does feel really rushed, and possibly that if we waited, it could be done better in the future, and that there isn't any reason why we have to vote to withdraw now, because doing it now, like you said, Kelly, it's going to be really messy. Like, what if you regret it? What if you want to put it back together again? You don't like the outcome. So wouldn't it be nice if we could like take more time, gather more information, and just like really take the time to have people figure out how to do it the right way. So I know that a lot of people really didn't like it when we consolidated, and I really liked our school board before. And so I understand, but just thinking that you don't have to feel like you need to make that decision right now. And yeah, I guess that's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Jane. Robin?
I agree with everything that Jane said, but I actually just wanted to raise my hand to let you know there's people in the waiting room.
Thank you. I don't, yep, thank you. Julianne Giordano?
Yes, hi. This is Julianne from Demerston.
I'm afraid you're muted again, Julianne.
Oh,
Something
I'm
happened.
sorry. I don't know what part of that you heard. So this is Julianne from
None, so
Demerston.
start over.
Okay. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. Just going off sense of urgency and talk of a loophole that may close, and just confirmation that I also heard that response from legislators that that's not the case. And I'm wondering if anybody on the school board can speak to that.
I can speak to the lack of clarity. The State Board of Ed did meet with legislators and asked for what was described as a loophole to be addressed by the legislature, which would potentially say clearly that state merged districts are not allowed to dissolve voluntarily. At the same time, there are two bills currently filed by legislators asking for legislation that specifically outlines the process by which state-formed merged districts could dissolve. So it's unclear. Alicia?
The last meeting had asked about what were some of the other reasons beside this loophole, because I was really struggling to see it as a loophole, because from the perspective that I was hearing and listening to the outcry of people, saying that this potentially has huge implications, I didn't feel that suing our state to dissolve a merger that the state had formed us in seemed counterproductive. And so you reviewed me to the January 5th meeting so that I could review that. And going off the question that was just asked before me, I contacted Jeanette White, and there's actually no legislature that is addressing how it was presented to the board was that this was crafted and that, you know, the terms that were used, I think that people were wholeheartedly believing that there was an urgency. And now that that's not there, and we're listening to board members even kind of discuss, like, in nice ways, how do we get out of this if the public didn't want it and if the town didn't want it? But everyone's saying, like, leadership wasn't consulted and this didn't happen and this didn't happen. And so what put us here seems so contrived that I think a lot of people are really struggling with that. And it just, I mean, that's a painful, you know, real loss of communication and trust within a lot of us that are already in vulnerable positions. And that's my position. And I thank everyone for the ability to be able to share that.
Thank you. Ellen Rago?
Hi, this is related to what Alicia said. Can you say more about the pending legislation that you mentioned, David? I'm curious, you know, what the pending legislation is that would potentially close this loophole. I looked, I didn't see anything, and I just was hoping you could give some more information about that.
Yeah, there are two bills, House 180 and House 182. One is submitted by Mike Murwicki of Putney and Heidi Sherman from Stowe that I believe addresses creating legislation to allow state farm districts to dissolve. And the second one, I believe, is just Heidi Sherman from Stowe, and I'm not sure exactly how it's related, but it has some of the same language. So those are the H180, I think, is the one you want to look for. I'm kind of losing track of, I think Tasha Tillman was next, and then Victoria, and then Molly Stoner. And if you have the sharing screen, it moves things alphabetically rather than by the order that the hands were raised. So if I make a mistake, please let me know. Tasha, please.
Thank you. I just wanted to mention that the thought of going to all of the great effort to dissolve, to then come back together potentially, if that didn't really work out, would be a lot of time, effort, energy, resources, money, tears, blood, sweat, all of that for nothing. It's as if this merger could be compared to a marriage, and we've been in this marriage for less than a year in a pandemic. I don't think that's the time to really consider how have a real gauge about how things are going for you in your marriage is if you got married in this pandemic. So I just don't see why, when the community is saying we're confused, despite the fantastic efforts of the communications committee, it's difficult to understand. It seems intentionally obtuse. It feels rushed. It just doesn't make sense. Thank you.
Thank you. Victoria?
Hi, thank you. Yeah, just to follow on what Tasha was saying, I feel very similarly, and what I would love to understand, and if I've missed this, I apologize, but I'm really confused about how this even ended up on the ballot. I've asked several people, nobody seems really all that sure. So I wonder if you could talk me through that a little bit, and who was involved in that decision, if the leadership councils at the different schools are involved. I'm involved in the BAM's leadership council. I didn't hear anything about it. So I did miss a couple of meetings, but if you could kind of walk me through how this ended up on the ballot, I would love to hear that.
Yeah, well, let me just be really clear, because I definitely haven't, since this question is coming up. The way that things get on the ballot of the Windham Southeast School District is based on Robert's rules, is the chair puts them there. And having heard from a number of residents, citizens, members of this community, there was concern about doing this. There was concern that there was this one opportunity that would go away. And listening to that and considering it for over a period of a month, I chose, and it's my responsibility, I chose to ask the board. I put it on our agenda to ask the board to deliberate and decide whether they wanted to warn a dissolution, or not a dissolution, a withdrawal article. And we talked about it in open meeting. It's recorded. It's all, the minutes are very detailed and complete. And we voted and we agreed to put it on the ballot. We found out that we can't put it on our ballot because it has to be decided by the towns. So we asked that we consult
to your answer to Ellen Rego about H180 and Mike Mrowicki, because I was in a meeting with them on Saturday morning where Jody Normando is also there. So Jody, correct me if I'm wrong on any of this, but what Mike said in that meeting is that he had sponsored the bill and that but that he didn't see it going anywhere this year. He was saying that it's not being pushed at all, that the legislature has a lot of other things they're focusing on related to education. And I'm just kind of looking at my notes here. He said they're really focused right now on the COVID issues and learning loss and some kind of a moratorium on buildings in schools that I didn't really understand. And then I was asking specifically about the time frame of crossover, and they were saying that crossover has been set now for March 12th, and that's the point at which, if any bill was going to be considered for this year, a bill would have had to have been in the Education Committee, gone to the House floor, been voted on, and sent over to the Senate by the 12th of March. And since it wasn't even being discussed in committee yet, he felt like it would be one of the bills that would be introduced but not go anywhere this year. That was Saturday morning. You know, who knows, things can change obviously, but I just wanted to add that because I was part of a discussion in which that was discussed.
Thank you.
So, oh, and I also wanted to just say one other thing, which is I would love to hear from administrators, just because I feel like their professional opinion is so critical in this kind of vote. And I wasn't clear about why their voices weren't welcomed in the earlier meetings. And so I would love to hear from any of them if they're willing to do that now.
Well, your wish is about to come true. You're going to hear from the Vermont Principal of the Year, Mark Spino.
Oh, great. Thank you.
Thanks, David. I think Frank has spoken very clearly in regards to the financial implications. In terms of a principal standpoint and a collaborative standpoint, I'm proud of the work that we've been able to do to get us to this point in the school year. We've been a collaborative team and have worked together to develop a safe in-person schools as well as multiple remote academies. And we've done this through collaboration and shared resources. I think I speak for all of our principals when I say that we believe in playing nice with each other and putting the students' needs as the top of our priority. And I have a lot of faith in our collaborative nature of our admin team moving forward into the spring and for years to come. And I think we are a strong group. And this is a time where we need to work together and share resources on behalf of what's in the best interest of our students. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Michelle, oh, there's Herv. Go ahead, Herv. Principal Herv Pelletier from Putney Central.
Yeah, hi. So, whoops, sorry, I have my little blocker on there. There I am. So much like Mark just said, I mean, our interest in this is not necessarily to sway votes or to weigh in or to tell people how to vote, but rather to just reflect on our experience as a unified district. I can say, I think that I speak for all of us as principals, unequivocally the last year of programming that we were able to pull together after an exhaustive summer of planning would not have been possible had each school been trying to pull together programming on their own. It just simply wouldn't have. We were able to pool resources, share staff, and basically create two school systems out of one. So we have full remote opportunities for kids, and we also have been able to have a various array of in-person hybrid instruction. So those are really big pluses in my book as far as the collaborative nature of it. And I just want to throw a shout out to Andy Skarzinski and Andy Pachuli for both working triple overtime to pull us all together as a group and make things possible.
Thank you, Herv. Julianne Egan, principal of Dummerston School.
Thank you. Yes, I'll just echo Herv and Mark's sentiments. I would like to add, and I think they alluded to this, that this experience since March for schools has been for everybody from classroom teachers to support staff to facilities crews to admin assistants. I mean, the list goes on and on. It has been the most professionally challenging experience of our entire careers. I can say that for everybody. It has been, it's been an honor to do it. It's been amazing to see the work that's been done, and we are so proud of our students, and we've been able to work in collaboration with families. And it's breathtaking, really, but it has been exhausting, and it's really because of our ability to come together and the interdependence that we've developed and that we have been able to capitalize upon, that I feel like has really allowed us to serve our students well during this time and as effectively as we can. So I just wanted to acknowledge that. I think that's just an important, I know other people have said that tonight, but that's just very important context. And, thinking about whatever structure, whatever, governing structure we end up adopting, we're in the context of a global pandemic, which has, is historic in nature, and it's going to be, it's changed our lives since March and will continue to completely affect the way that we're educating students moving forward in the recovery. So I just wanted to add that. Thank you.
Thank you, Julianne. Kelly, principal of Academy School.
Hi, thanks. I wasn't really prepared to share either, but I do just want to echo the sentiments of my colleagues and really just make sure everyone understands how collaborative we all are as an administrative team. I think for years we have been, but we are now stronger than ever in terms of our collaboration. We meet as a team of principals several times a week. We talk about the challenges of running a school during a pandemic. We celebrate the small victories that we have when we get over the hump of, trying something new or planning for a new semester or a new schedule for the 8th time this year, something like that. We've been able to share resources. I know others have spoken about the remote schools, but those really wouldn't have been possible without the merger. I think that there could be potential for more shared resources once COVID is over. It's hard to say, during COVID what that is, but one example could be after school programming. There's a lot that I think we can offer as a united team. I also don't know that we've had the full time to explore the fiscal savings that the merger could provide us. And putting the dissolution question on the ballot so quickly didn't really leave us time to spread information to the general public. I realize how polarizing this issue is, and that's the last thing any of us want or need right now, is to cause stress or worry to our community members. But it was really hard to be asked as a school leader to speak on this issue without having time to prepare factual information. It's just, there's so much to it, and I don't want to get it wrong. And, I have an opinion as a parent and as an educator and as a taxpayer, but I also think it's my civil duty as a principal to really be factual in my education of my families and community members of my school. And in this time, I didn't feel like I was able to do that. And that was what was hardest for me, was just to be asked by people who trust my opinion to not be able to really speak as an educated person about it. So I appreciate all the work that the communications committee did in preparing that document. It's really well done. I just wish we could have kind of worked together on it sooner so that we could have spread it a little bit more widely before the town meeting day.
Thank you, Kelly. Mary Kaufman, principal of Oak Grove.
Hi. Yep. Thanks, everybody. And thanks, Kelly. I think that you said that really nicely. It's hard to gather all that information so quickly. But one thing that I want to always bring to the forefront is really what's best for the kids. And I think it's important that we focus on making decisions that are going to benefit the most kids as possible, all kids, I should say, and also our staff. I know our teachers have been working incredibly hard this year, more so than they ever have had to in past years, but they've been working in different ways. And they've also had opportunities to come together and work with teachers and folks from other schools that they haven't had the opportunity to do in the past. We've seen a lot of benefits come from the collaboration that we've been able to do as administrators. And I can imagine that can continue as we move forward. And I wouldn't want to see that end too shortly. So I appreciate the opportunity to speak now. And I do appreciate hearing, that people want to hear from principals. I think that we can offer a different insight into what's going on in the schools. And it's also important to hear from our teachers and students whenever possible as well. So I think we've worked really, really hard this year, and we will continue to work really hard for the kids that we serve and for the families in our communities. And I think it's important that our community know that we're in this for the best interest of our kids, and we will continue to do that no matter what, but it's been nice to be able to do it together. So thank you.
Thank you, Mary. Keith Lyman.
Yeah, hi. I just wanted to thank
The chairman. I'm sorry, I didn't mention that you were the principal of BAMS, the middle school.
Thank you. Thank you, David. Yeah, I want to echo my colleagues' comments. I just wanted to quickly share a story, a specific example of how the consolidation has helped with some flexibility in the pandemic. For example, Dummerston and Putney students staff worked with our staff to provide all the online fully remote instruction. We call it Team Felix. And so Putney 7th and 8th grade students and Dummerston 7th and 8th grade students who are fully remote meet with our teachers at BAMS and with our kids. So the three schools kind of have an online middle school all together. And I think that would have been really difficult to do if we were all in separate schools, but it worked really well with the consolidated district. And
afraid we're
schools and
losing
provide
you.
that opportunity for our kids.
Great.
Sorry. I guess my internet's unstable. I apologize.
It's okay. I think we got most of it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Keith. Ellen Rego.
Hi, Ellen Rago again. Yes, I am not a principal, but I am a teacher at Dummerston School. Julianne Egan is my principal. And I think that what I'm hearing from the principals is really connected to the way that I felt when I first heard about the possibility of this. The fact that this item was on the ballot, which is just like, I am doing absolutely all that I can. I am working as hard as I can, and I can't work any harder. And so what that means to me in the context of this item being on the ballot is, you know, Julianne Egan covers lunch breaks so that teachers can have a break. She delivers lunch to us. And so the idea that her efforts would be pulled away from anything right now to focus on either communicating around this or around, if this vote went through on working with a new school board and doing all of the work that entailed to, communicate with this new school board. And I mean, I don't know what that process would look like, and I don't know how much time it would involve for our principals, but I imagine it would be a time commitment. And just the idea that any of her time would be pulled away from the vital support that she's providing right now to students and teachers is just unthinkable. I mean, it's hard to communicate how hard we are all working and how connected that feels to these ballot items.
Thank you, Ellen. I don't see any other hands. Michelle, do we want to continue along on I think we have another page?
Sure. I think we have a couple.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think we got through the tuition students.
Yep, we're on to the next. What would the school boards look like? This is a little bit easy.
Okay.
So currently our school board design is, we have 4 representatives from Brattleboro, 2 from Dummerston, 2 from Guilford, and 2 from Putney. This was determined in the Articles of Agreement and voted for by the people to have this configuration. The current board represents all students in the district, not just the town that they come from. And you can see there's a list of some of our subcommittees that this board has created. Withdrawal, if a town withdrew from the WSESD, they would elect their own new school board. Historically, that's usually looked like 5 people, but there's some flexibility in how many people represent their board. And that school board would represent just their own school district. Overall, school boards have the same responsibilities. So the responsibilities of this board would be held by the responsibility of a board overseeing 1 school versus 10 or 5 or 7 in the case of Brattleboro. So not much difference there. Moving down, how will the Windham Southeast Supervisory Union work? So the Windham Southeast Supervisory Union is combined right now with the Vernon Town School District and the Windham Southeast School District. Our 5 towns have always historically been part of this supervisory union and would continue to do so. And these services would not be changed. Each school district would be responsible for paying a proportional amount to what they use of the services. And the general departments that are covered under the SU, the Windham Southeast Supervisory Union, are administrative offices that come out of central office, our superintendent, technology support, curriculum, that type of stuff. Centralized coordination of school bus contracts, so transportation, food services, Office of Diversity, Equity, and Social Justice, and our special education services. Any questions on this page?
Okay. We've gone another hour and 3 minutes, so we'll take another 5-minute break. We'll be back at 8:29 and we'll go silent until then. Okay, we are back. Michelle, you want to continue on our communities engaged with the school board?
Sure.
Thank you.
Okay. Communities engaging with the school board when remaining in the WSESD. Attending meetings, the WSESD board meets twice per month. Currently, these meetings are operated remotely, but in-person meetings rotate through all schools in the district. These meetings pertain to the issues and decisions that affect all schools within the district. The superintendent provides an administrative report at each meeting, and principals report on individual schools routinely and as needed. Each school is represented by a leadership council, an advisory group for the WSESD board made up of school administrators, school staff, community members, and a WSESD board member. The leadership councils are intended to ensure community input in deliberations of the WSESD board and are still being developed across the district. Leadership council responsibilities will be guided by the council interest and include such things as providing input on budget and resource priorities, policies and procedures, board deliberations, hiring process, student learning goals, school community values, and community engagement. The school budget is presented for approval by voters of all 4 towns at an annual meeting held independent of the town meeting day. In a new established local school district, attending the school board meetings historically have always been held twice a month. In-person meetings of that school board would take place in a building within that school district. The newly formed school board would focus on issues and decisions that affect the schools in that district. This could include administrative reports from the superintendent and town principal or principals also. The newly formed school board could determine the continuation of the leadership councils. The school budget is presented for approval by voters at town meeting. And if any town is approved for withdrawal from the WSESD, the withdrawing town would not have representation for any schools outside their newly formed district, such as middle school or high school, if you're one of the outlying towns. Any questions? Move down.
Okay.
What would differ in resources available to students and staff in a merged or separate district? So obviously no changes as if nothing happens. If a town withdraws or there's a dissolution, there will be changes to how teachers are contracted. Educators are employed by the school district they work for and must be contracted separately when employed in multiple regional schools. Partial employment in multiple regional schools can be cumulative towards full-time status, although not guaranteed and subject to changes in district needs and budgeting priorities. If a town withdraws from the WSESD, the affected district would be required to negotiate options for educating students in grades not offered by their school district. All school districts in the state of Vermont are responsible for providing a K through 12th grade education. All courses and programs at WRCC will continue to be offered free of charge to area high school students. How does COVID-19 response change at our schools? Currently, the WSESD staff from a variety of schools have collaborated and worked with other schools across the district for staffing needs. We have remote staffing, remote students being taught in other schools and teachers teaching in other schools. Aid for COVID-19 related expenses is overseen by our finance office, and there are some shared resources. In the event of withdrawing, a town is approved to withdraw. Any staffing transfers between schools that are not in the same district would have to be individually negotiated between the district's educators and their union. Central office for the WSESU would continue to oversee securing of funding for aid for COVID-19 response and distributions of funds to each school district with minimal interruption. I think Andy clarified there might be a little bit hectic, but basically schools will still get their funding. Are we on a new page? Were there any questions?
Yeah, Andy has a hand up. And
Yeah,
Bethany.
I had an email from Jackie. Her computer crashed and she was wondering if you could let her back in.
Yeah,
the
I
meeting.
just did let her in. Thanks, Andy.
Gotcha.
Okay.
Okay, what happens after this vote? There are no changes if nobody votes to leave, obviously. If any town votes to withdraw from the WSESD and all towns in the WSESD vote to approve the town's withdrawal, the Vermont State Board of Ed will consider a petition for withdrawal from the WSESD. If any town is approved to withdraw, the Vermont State Board of Education will hold a hearing to determine the new configuration of the remaining schools comprised of the WSESD. The current vote pertains only to the withdrawal and approval of withdrawal for each town from the WSESD. The Vermont State Board of Ed determines eligibility and approval status. In the event a town or towns withdraw from the WSESD, the State Board of Ed will determine if the towns remaining should continue to form a unified district. Their criteria on that was, is it in the best interest of the state, the student, and the remaining towns that comprise that district? This could result in the dissolution of the entire WSESD, regardless of voter results on Article A. The WSESD and elected board members remain in place while individual school districts are established. Any town subject to redistricting will elect a new school board to oversee the transitional period of separation, and a budget approved by voters must be established before a district can be independent. And just that final sentence, people are wondering if we've been forced to merge, basically, can it happen again? Again, we can't predict the action of legislators, but they do have the authority to create, merge, or dissolve school districts.
Okay, thank you. So we are back to the unshared screen. I can see many more people. Any questions, further questions on the warned articles? Bethany.
Hi, I have two things. And again, David, if you wouldn't mind letting me say them first, that would be great. My first thing is I've noticed that a couple times tonight and in previous meetings that if somebody later in the meeting tries to get in, they end up in the waiting room for a while. I just want to make the strong suggestion that in other large Zoom meetings I've been in, it works really well to have somebody other than the person who's leading the meeting be in charge of the waiting room. And that way they can get in really quickly. Because David, I know you're doing a lot right now with, hand raising and leading the meeting. So having another board member take that on might be really helpful for making sure people don't get stuck in the waiting room for 10, 15, 20 minutes and missing the meeting. And then my second one is, Michelle, could you, or anybody else, just to get this louder for the people in the back, can we just cover that if somebody, and also just to clarify for myself, if somebody is out of the BUHS district, so let's say that one of the outer towns leaves and their students become like tuitioned to go to BUHS, that the people in that town do not have representation on the BUHS board, which would mean, and yes, all of these are big ifs because it depends on all the different steps to get there. But that would mean, as an example, that if something happens at BUHS and it is not a town that has representation, they would not have a say in what was happening. So let's just say, hypothetically, BUHS decides that they can no longer, for whatever reason, fund or support their theater program or their sports programs. And so they vote as a school district to get rid of some type of program like the music program or the football team, that a town that doesn't have representation in that district would have no say on that school board or no vote over those decisions. Is that correct? Just so that everybody understands what that means and that it's a bigger deal than just, oh, you don't get a say in day-to-day policy, but it's actually really big policies that could be impacted.
It would be all policies, Bethany. If there's if you're not a member of the school district, you don't get representation on the board. If the UHS became part of the Brattleboro Town School District and the other towns did not reform a union district, then anyone tuitioning to that school would not have representation on the board. Other questions? Alicia?
Yeah, I might have missed which page this was on, so I'm sorry to not have specific on that. But I thought there was a wording that seemed different than one of the meetings that I had been at, and it was the last bullet point, I believe on the second to last page, that was in regards to tuition and tuition students that were not in that budget year. Is there any way that we could refer back up to that?
Yes. Let's see if I can find it.
In the event of total dissolution of the WSESD, future school districts can collaborate to establish a union high school subject to voter approval. Is that what you're asking about, Alicia?
No, it's not.
No.
Sorry, I think it's a little further down.
The next one says tuition students would not have board representation. Does that sound right?
I'm sorry, it's hard for me to.
No, it's okay. It's okay. We can
see where you're scrolling.
Okay, well, let me start at the bottom because I think it'll be closer to the bottom than the top, and I'll just go through slowly. And if you can see it, just tell me the first 3 lines on the words on the bullet, and I'll stop right there.
David, I wonder if it's on page 2.
Well, the pages aren't numbered.
says-
There's a tuition students would not have board representation.
Yes, I think that is the sentence. I'm sorry, I missed.
No, that's fine. That's why we have
I
this
think
up.
Michelle started the sentence and then I didn't remember
Yeah,
it that in the
no.
beginning.
Yep, this one was not, and this is the longer extended version. And so this bullet point was not on the shorter page. So that might be why it looks new. Tuition students would not have a board representation or ability to vote on the budget of schools outside their district. That's what we were just talking about. Tuition students are accounted for in a school district budget. However, if an incoming student was not accounted for when the budget was approved, there's no reimbursement of state funds and the town is responsible to pay the tuition for those students. So what that means is that, that could be impactful, certainly if you're in one of the smaller school districts, if that was how it was reconfigured. If a student came in after the budget was approved, say a family moved in and they have, a 9th grader and an 11th grader, those students would still need to, they would enroll in a school and tuition would be paid and the school would have to provide tuition out of their reserves. It wouldn't be counted as, it wouldn't have been accounted for basically in the line budget. And Frank could clarify if I'm not doing a very good job being clear on that.
Is that K through 12? I'm sorry to ask another
Well, the
question.
tuition students comes when a town, on any grades a town can't offer. So for instance, Dummerston is K through 8th. So it would be, their tuition students would be to provide grades 9 through 12. Guilford they go up to 6. So it'd be 7 through 12. So it's the towns that don't have, and Putney would be 9 through 12, basically.
And when was that added?
So the short form was trying to condense the most significant bullet points. And so everything came from this document, but it's 2 pages instead of 6. And so this was always on the long document. We just were trying to not be too redundant and confusing and get to the points, certainly, especially for people who don't have students in the schools, so that it was more, a more blanket description for people, all stakeholders, not just people who are really invested in the school operation. So that's why we did a shorter form. 6 pages can be a lot of information to read. So that's why that bullet wasn't pulled over onto the shorter page.
Mhm. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks. Eric, line back.
Yes, hi. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I have a question just about the language of Article 14 here. I'm reading this and I'm seeing the word authorized. And to me, it's not clear that this vote actually is saying that we are voting to withdraw from the district. We are authorizing the town to withdraw. And I'm not sure, again, whether the select boards get involved in this, but if that's the case, and this is not compelling or requiring the town to withdraw, and all it says is we're authorizing this, then, and also there's no time limit here. There's nothing about timing. Doesn't that mean then that if a town were to vote to authorize, or if the voters of a town were to vote to authorize the town to withdraw, that the town would ultimately not necessarily have to withdraw, could take time to consider this, look at all the facts, debate the pros and cons, and 3 years from now, make a decision? I'm not sure who can answer that, but that's how it's written, and that's how I'm reading it.
Yeah, authorize simply means that the town is authorized to withdraw, and then to do whatever needs to be done by statute after that. There is no time. There may be statute that says when that has to happen. I really couldn't. I think that probably this because it's unprecedented, the State Board of Ed would have to make a determination, but someone in the town would have to schedule meetings and schedule elections and go through that whole process. I don't know that there's any time restriction at all. That's just not information that we have.
So what I'm hearing then is that, again, if a town, I'm from Dummerston, let's say Dummerston voters, this Article 14 passes, that does not necessarily mean Dummerston is going to ultimately withdraw.
I don't know if I can't say. I think if what could happen is that voters could petition to have an item put on the town warning again, or have a special election, or ask the select board to do it, and have a special election again to decide not to withdraw. But as far as what happens after the vote to the authorizing the withdrawal, is that I'm sure there's some process in the state that requires you to set up a school district. I can't tell you what it is. I'm not sure if Andy or Frank or anybody else have more clarity on that. It hasn't come up.
I believe, the statute 16 VSA 724 refers to steps that have to be taken. And so once the vote's certified, we would have to transmit that to the Secretary of Education, who would relay it to the State Board of Ed. They would determine when those boards would occur. But I think, it sounds like, there's really nothing in statute that would indicate that there's a timeline, but it doesn't really indicate that they can just shelve the vote either.
Michelle, did you have I saw your hand for a second.
Andy pretty much said it. I was going to say the statute basically does say that the votes would be certified and then sent to the State Board of Ed. So, in that reading, that to me sounds like it's a process that once it's started, it keeps moving. But it's a good question to ask your select board to clarify at your town info meeting.
Yeah, I will do that tomorrow. And maybe that language comes from the statute itself, But again, authorize to me simply means allow, provide the ability to withdraw. It does not necessarily say they must withdraw.
That's the language that was, that our attorney provided. So,
yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Yes, thank you.
Further questions? Seeing none, could I have a motion to adjourn, please? Oh, I see one. Julianne Giordano?
Yeah, I'm so sorry. I couldn't
Okay.
find the raise hand fast enough. I was just, and maybe I missed this earlier, but when it said that smaller towns may see a tax increase, I wasn't sure if there's any more specific information as somebody who's in a smaller town as to what that looks like, or if any work has been done by the finance committee. I know it's hard to project, I'm sure, but
There is, if you go to the WSESD website, under agendas, you will find a document, I believe says comparative. Frank, what is it? What is it called? Comparative?
It's a dissolution analysis.
Dissolution analysis, yeah. And it's in the, it's down a couple of board meetings and it's in a whole list of documents. So just look for dissolution analysis and you'll find a side-by-side comparison of the merged district finance number, fiscal numbers, and then right next to it, each of the town schools and the high school and the career center. And it's important to note that on the top of each of those, it says hypothetical, which means that we are less than certain. It literally means less than positive. But based on numbers and based on the numbers that are used aren't certain, but the model compares what would happen. So the relationship of the results is you can be pretty confident that those relationships happen. The exact numbers don't, but the tendency and in the broad sense, it's a pretty good indicator of what would happen. But again, it is hypothetical. We couldn't, we can't say here's what's going to happen as a board because we're not certain. So we can't say things we're not certain about. But that analysis has been done. You could just be able to find it fairly easily.
Can you repeat that?
Say that
I'm
again?
sorry, I was just saying it was under the February 11th meeting.
It's under the agenda, February 11th, because I couldn't see it either.
February 11th Finance Committee.
Okay. So that's something we can maybe just look at real fast because it's really hard to find on our website. I'm still digging.
It's under agendas on the WSESD website. Maggie Foley?
Along the lines of what Michelle just said, I wondered if maybe Frank could just give us kind of the top line estimates per town for an increase, because I do think some of those kind of financial documents can be overwhelming for people to read and understand.
That's certainly true. This one is actually fairly clear, but it is a lot of columns and numbers. Frank, do you have those projections
Sure.
in a simplified form?
Yeah, I'll just share my screen.
Sure. Yeah, I think you're still able to. Yep.
Okay. So I have it on the website. Let's see. This one looks like my spreadsheet.
Yeah.
So I wanna pull up one that's on the website. Yeah, so that it looks the same to you. So let me go back to share screen. And sure it is. Okay, so I was looking at some email. So when I go up to one of these, I have it open.
There we go.
Yeah. February 11 and dissolution right here. So there it is. And so here's the document. This was reviewed with the Communication Council and the Finance Committee. One thing that is a just general point of reference, here's our proposed tax rate for the fiscal year 22.
Frank, can you make that, is it possible to make that a little larger?
Yeah, I think so.
I'm not sure it's too small for everybody, but yeah, that's way better for me.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, so just a point of reference. So here's our $703 that we talked about for the proposed budget as it relates to the alternatives, this potential withdrawal or dissolution. But as a baseline, here's our $703, and then here's the history back when we were separate districts, and the average of us when we were separate. We became a unified system in FY20. And notable here that this $703 is the lowest tax rate when we compare it to the averages over the last 7 years. But more to your question, what we did was we took the $52,103,000 that is the proposed budget, and we identified each of our sites within the $52,103,000 unified system. So, we're using actual numbers that are being proposed. When you calculate a tax rate, you have to take spending, and then you take revenue that is not coming from the tax rate, and you subtract spending from revenue, and you get a number that is divided by number of kids. So it's just those three numbers that we broke out into the individual sites, school sites, so that we could develop these hypothetical tax rates. But it's important to note that it's coming from an actual proposed budget that's been approved by the school board, actual revenues that are identified to fund in part that budget. The difference between this 52 million and the 8 comes from the tax rate. And there's the actual kids that we're using. So in every case, we've identified spending, revenue, and kids, and then we just plug it into this school funding formula, which is shared in the town report, and this would be across the state. This is the format that the state requires us to present. So here's our unified system. Again, the 52 million, the 8 million in revenues divided by 2,263 kids is the 19,000, and here's that $703. So again, that's our baseline. And then here we go into these hypothetical groups. I think the questions seem to be more interested in the smaller towns. I can come back to each town, but there's the Brattleboro High School in Brattleboro town. Here's the Dummerston School. So this is the Dummerston's part of this $52 million proposed budget. And here's Dummerston's share of the revenue. And most of that revenue is an assumed small schools grant. And that's the majority of that revenue. So spending minus revenue equals a net number divided by 149 kids in the Dummerston school, pre-K through grade 8, and you get a number. This is just the school funding formula. There's not a lot of assumptions here. 21,000 per kid. And again, that's 3.1 million divided by 149 kids is 21,000. Here's the issue that we were talking about earlier. You have the state setting the threshold that Sean Murphy had asked about. They set that every year, and they say, well, if a school board and a town approves a budget of greater than threshold, then this is the new money that comes into play that does not exist over here. You see, over here, there's no extra penalty money over here. But in this scenario, there's $2,000 of spending over the threshold. So they don't say, we're just going to tax you on a $21,000 spending. They're going to say, we're going to tax you on 21,000 plus 2,000 to get to this 24,000. That's where we see a substantial increase in taxes. So the tax rate is a simple calculation. It's spending per student, in this case 24,000, divided by this yield number that they set. The legislature sets that every year. So 24 divided by 11 is 2.1. That's your tax rate. That's how it works. That's the math behind it. So obviously that's a big increase over $1.70, our current unified tax rate. But this is just the pre-K through 8 figure for Dummerston. It's less clear, as you've heard from the presentations tonight, as to who's going to pay for the secondary and how is that, how do students access secondary. But under the old rules, if a union high school was reformed, so we know that's unlikely in the first couple, 3 years, but if it was reformed, then the state law brings in a calculation of a weighted average of the two tax rates. So if we go through the same calculation for the high school, it computed $1.63. And if 30% of the Dummerston pre-K through 12, so 30% of the students, meaning only grades 9, 10, 11, and 12, if that represents 30% of the Dummerston student population, then you get 30% of $1.63. And then that would leave 70% of students at the higher $2.11, okay? So you can see right off the bat, that's going to be a problem when we get three kind of forces that drive up taxes when we split schools into small pieces. One, we lose the exemption from debt. This 19.3 does not create a penalty because we have an exemption from old debt that says, yeah, the state did not want to disincentivize capital improvements for creating good learning environments for kids. So they do not create a penalty. If you are not part of that district, meaning as Dummerston is a separate district, you lose that exemption. Plus you have a smaller group of kids divided into a spending number that creates a higher spending. So there's strike number one. Strike number two is you are now getting a proportional allocation of a very high tax rate and a relatively low tax rate for secondary, and it derives an average between those two tax rates of $1.93. So in this example for Dummerston, under what we know today in terms of equalized yields, numbers of equalized students, and spending at the Dummerston school site, we see the impact of a substantially higher tax rate. The math is the same for every school in the state. The school funding formula is designed to allow voters to compare school district to school district when it gets to an equalized tax rate. So here's the scenario for Guilford. I make a quick note here. We know that Guilford doesn't have 124 kids. I think they have closer to 115 kids, but the legislature froze the equalized student count. So this 124 is artificially high. And even so, it still creates this $20,000 spending instead of 19. Again, no exemption, so you have a penalty. So we would have an 11% increase for the pre-K through 6. When we come down to secondary, same $1.63. If this is the big if a high school was reformed and you had essentially an assessment here of $1.63, Guilford, having only gone through grade 6, gets a larger proportion of the $1.63, so their impact is not as severe. However, as I've had a conversation with the finance committee, if we plugged in 115 kids here instead of 124, and we didn't sustain the small schools grant, which I think is unlikely over time, this would be more like a 15 or 12 or 15% impact, just like Emerson. And that is the challenge for a small school. If you lose 5 kids, your tax rate is going to get spiked substantially. Here's the Putney scenario, 3.7 million. There's their revenues, 175 kids. Same issues here where they have a penalty that under a unified system does not exist. 12% increase at the local pre-K through 8. And then their share, again, small share because they go through grade 8 of the $1.63. So they see a similar impact. So this is definitely the design of the school funding formula. This is why Act 46 did occur. And the legislature has not changed the funding formula to accommodate the small schools. And if anything, they continue to debate eliminating the small schools grant that helps mitigate some of that effect. So that was our analysis, and
just a modern update to that, the pupil weighting study that was just completed by researchers centered at the University of Massachusetts, they delivered to the legislature, includes additional weighting for small schools and for rural schools, recognizing that it costs more. So there will be probably not until next year because of the complexity of the task, but in the next couple of years, the small school grants will be replaced by a different weighting system. 3 more, I see 3 other hands, Robin Morgan, then Tasha Tillman, then Bethany Ranquist. Robin?
Thanks, David. I have a comment and then a question. First, the comment is, I just wanted to comment on those numbers that Frank was sharing to reiterate where he mentioned, because this was buried in a lot of explanations, that the numbers where these expensive elementary tax rates were ameliorated by a lower tax rate for the unified high school district would not apply to a town that is withdrawing from this district because they wouldn't be part of a unified high school district. So those other percentage of their kids that weren't in the elementary grades, that part of the budget would be tuition payments, not participating in a unified high school district. So the numbers on those documents, the final outcome numbers with like the CLA and whatever, is not accurate. The elementary tax rates are all that we can really say are sort of close to what they might be. Of course, we don't really know exact numbers because of what he said about the fact that we don't have the separated out student numbers of which equalized pupil numbers are from each town. So I just want to caution people that we would lose that tax benefit of the unified high school district that makes all of our elementary school tax rates a little bit lower. Our total school tax rates, I guess, a little bit lower. The question that I wanted to ask is specifically about students who want to go to a school that is not in their town for elementary. And I know that is a really rare situation, but that it is something that currently students are able, or families are able to petition the board if they feel that there's a special situation where they have a specific need to go to a school other than their hometown's school. How would that change if a town was to withdraw from the district?
Andy, I want to ask you to respond to that, please.
So we've allowed that in certain situations when there's a petition to the board or a request to the board for that. So there've been circumstances where that has taken place. In the future, students would not really be allowed that option to do so because they would have to attend the school in which their district is. The school in which their town is, which would be their district at the elementary level.
Thank you. Tasha Tillman?
Thank you. I'm going to pull a Captain Obvious here with a comment and say that despite Frank being the consummate content expert about budgets, it's very obtuse for an average voter to, number one, find that information on the website, and number two, digest it to make a fully informed decision and an appropriate vote. Thank you.
Thank you. Bethany?
Actually, that perfectly piggybacks on what I was going to say as well. That first of all, I have so much appreciation for you, Frank, for being able to even process that information and put it into a document, because my brain hurts just looking at it. So I'm so grateful that we have mathematicians who can do that for us. But my brain hurts kind of listening to that and looking at it. And I consider myself relatively okay with math. I'm concerned that, that there's a lot of people in our district who either can't access that information via internet access or can't access it because of language barriers. And we don't have a sign language interpreter on these meetings. So I'm concerned that there's not that option for people who might not be able to listen to what Frank was just going over. But also I'm just, my whole point in that is that I'm wondering if there's a way to make this a lot more accessible, similar to the bulleted point short document about the ballot questions, and perhaps just have a very, very simplified bullet point document that shows the estimated tax increase based on the information, and then direct people to the document that Frank just shared if they have more questions. But a basic, like, if you leave the district, this is the estimated, as far as we can figure it out, tax increase, so that we can just look at it very quickly and very easily, so that voters can have a better sense of it without having to find those numbers that are buried in a document that's buried on the website that might not be accessible to everybody to begin with. Thanks.
Ellen?
Hi, this is actually Emily Marker, Ellen's wife. And I'm a parent to two Dummerston students. My wife teaches at Dummerston and I teach at Academy School. And I have a couple of questions I'd like to clarify. It's my understanding that if the school board wants to move something to the ballot of the select board, there's two routes. One, the school board votes on it and then it gets recommended. Two, the school board puts out a petition, which requires, I believe, 10% of the electorate's signatures. Is that correct?
No, the school board doesn't put out a petition. If a citizen wants to have something on the ballot, they or a group of citizens, they put a petition together, and I'm not sure. I think it's 5. I don't know the percent, 5 or 8 or 10. I'm not absolutely certain.
So the school board only has one route to getting a question on the ballot?
Yeah, we have to vote to put it on the ballot.
Okay. And that vote took place recently, I believe, right? Could you tell us what month that vote took place?
I believe it was January 19th. It might have been later, might have been the 29th. I think it was the 19th.
Of 2021.
Yeah.
So it feels very irresponsible that that was the timeline that you moved with. I remember attending the February 16th meeting a week ago today, which is when the 2-page document was presented. And there were a number of school board members, majority of school board members, had not seen the document and were completely unaware of the facts in that document. And I already had my ballot in hand as a voter. And I know that there's different people attending, these meetings, and I just really want to make that clear to everybody that that's a decision you made, and I think it's very irresponsible. And I also wanted to share that as a teacher in Brattleboro, I feel so many benefits to our current merged district. And I see those benefits affecting my students every day. And no one asked me or any of the other staff at my school our opinions. No one's asked for information. And when I heard my wife Ellen speak to what it's like at her school, and when I hear the other principals talk about what it's like at their school, we are alive because we are working together. And that is my goal right now, is to stay alive and to keep my students alive. There are many parents on this call right now whose children I've had or currently have in my classroom, and I will try my absolute best to make sure they stay alive. But that doesn't, I'm eating my lunch sitting in my cinder block, one room kindergarten bathroom, sitting clothed on the toilet with the door closed, because it's the only place I feel safe, having come in from the wilderness where it's freezing cold and I need to sit down and eat my lunch, and there's nowhere else I feel safe in my building. And that's through no fault of the administrators at my school. Kelly and John are working so hard. And the idea that staff in my school would have to, for example, recopy the forms that we are required to fill out for reimbursement onto a different color sheet of paper, which is what happened when the district merge happened, blows my mind, because what we need to do right now is not die. And the fact that you folks decided to move this forward, or some of you decided to move this forward in January of 2021, in the middle of a global pandemic, when I am giving all I have to give, because that is where my heart is, to stay alive, is really insulting, and it feels incredibly irresponsible. It is not how I do things in my kindergarten classroom, and I expect better. And I just need to also, I mean, there are so many teachers with so many opinions about this who have not been asked, and frankly aren't even aware this is happening, because we are maxed out. My wife has not a drop left to give to my family at 3 o'clock in the morning when she finishes her plans. It's too much. Thank you.
Any other questions? Seeing none, can I have a motion to adjourn?
Mr. Chair,
Yes,
there being no further business before this board, I move that we adjourn.
is there a second?
Seconded.
Tim, I think you did that?
Yes.
Yeah, moved by Ann, seconded by Tim to adjourn. All those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We are adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you everyone for coming.